Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Terrors with Steel City Dahmer.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Today, I'll be covering a movie that started it all. This movie gave us one of the biggest horror and pipe culture icons in movie history. He's been on The Simpsons, he had his own TV show. He's been mentioned by presidents for fuck's sakes. I'm talking about the one dream monster himself, Freddy Krueger. I'm honestly so excited, so let's jump in and review A Nightmare on Elm Street. We start this nightmare off with Freddy Krueger, played by Robert Englund, in his boiler room building the most famous weapon in horror history, and what a beauty it is. We cut to Tina running through a hallway in her nightgown. She appears to be running, but from what? The sheep? Maybe, but I don't think so. She's running from the Springwood slasher, who jumps up behind her and scares her away. She wakes up with slash holes in her nightgown as she clutches her crucifix before going back to sleep. You see these girls in white playing jump rope and singing the famous 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you song that's throughout this franchise. Kind of act as a sign that Freddy is around and to keep him in your mind since he lives through your fear of him. We pan over to Nancy, played by Heather Langenkamp, and Glenn, played by Johnny Depp. That's right, this movie introduced Johnny Depp to the big screen. Tina's played by Amanda Weiss in the background as well, though don't get attached to her character. As they walk to school talking about the dreams that Tina and Nancy had last night, we also get introduced to the tough guy of the group, Rod, played by Jess Garcia. Johnny Depp gives them solid advice about dreaming, and they split to go to their classes. Later that night, Nancy, Tina, and Glenn are out at Tina's house. Tina and Nancy go back to talking about the guy who stalks their dreams. After talking about his fingerknives and his dirty red and green sweater, they realize they've been dreaming about the same guy. A screeching noise they're all familiar with comes from outside, and Johnny Depp goes out to make sure the coast is clear by saying the bitchiest threat I've ever heard in my life.
I'm gonna punch out your ugly lights, whoever you are.
It's really Rod though, and Rod's here to fucking party. Glenn wants to party, but Nancy isn't having it. You know, the virgin always survives in these movies.
Morality sucks.
Tina hears some goofy shit outside and tries to wake Rob up, but he doesn't give a shit. Nancy doesn't give a shit either when Freddy tries to come out of the wall over her. Back in Tina's dreamland, she goes outside and investigates the noise she heard. After walking into the alleyway, we get our first glimpse of Stretch Armstrong. Freddy Krueger. He makes up with his goofy arms by singing a badass tagline, first of many.
Please, God.
This is God.
He begins chasing after her like a fucking weirdo before appearing in front of her, and then out behind a tree, and before cutting some fingers off just to fuck with her. They fight back and forth before Tina rips off his face and Freddy laughs like a fucking crypt keeper. Tina fights against Freddy so bad that it wakes up Rod. Rod hops out of the bed and pulls the blankets off her to find no one under there with Tina. All of a sudden, 4 cut marks appear on her torso as she flies into the corner before getting dragged up the wall and across the ceiling before Freddy letting her drop, spilling blood all over Rod. We cut to Nancy's dad, Chief Thomas, played by John Saxon, going into the police station to check up on Nancy. He's pissed because she was at her friend's house. The chief thinks that Rod is behind the murder. The next day as Nancy's walking to school, she gets kidnapped and pulled off the street. Oh, it's just Rod. He's trying to say he didn't do it, and Nancy knows that, but Nancy is being followed by her dad and the cops. The chief goes to arrest Rod, but he runs, but gets fucking caught anyways. In English class, Nancy falls asleep, much like I would've. As she dreams, her fucking dead friend comes to go get her to ditch class in a fucking body bag. Nancy goes to follow her friend as she floats down the halls. She runs into the bitch-ass hall monitor who ends up being Freddy Krueger and gives her some safety tips. Nancy continues to follow the trail of blood and ends up in the boiler room from earlier in the movie. She calls out to Tina, but to only get Freddy. She asks who he is and he responds with,
Who are you?
It's not a good way to introduce yourself. That's not even a name. That's self-mutilation and chicken noodle soup, fam. He begins to chase her with his claws in the sky, but Nancy runs to a dead end. He slides his blades across the metal pipe, making that iconic noise. As Freddy flicks his tongue at her, she burns the outside of her arm in the dream and pulls herself out. She wakes up yelling and screaming in class with a burn on the inside of her arm. Back at the 1428 Elm Street house, Nancy is trying to unwind herself with a bath, but bathing tired should always be avoided. Freddy almost gets her as he pulls her underwater, but Nancy got free and acts like nothing happened. Nancy grabs a bottle of Sta Awake and says fuck sleep for the rest of her life. She's staying up watching The Evil Dead before letting Johnny Depp into her room through the window. Nancy asks Glenn to watch her sleep, and if she seems like she's struggling, to wake her up. In her dream world, she leaves the house to go find Krueger. Nancy finds herself at the police station and looks up into Rod's cell where he's sleeping. Freddy walks through the bars of Rod's cell and grabs a blanket, and poof, he's gone. Tina makes another appearance before yelling for Glenn to wake up, but only Freddy is watching her. Freddy begins to chase Nancy back into her house. Gets to the door, barely makes up the stairs because they're made out of gum and fish guts. She gets to her room and sees that Glenn's asleep. Good job, Glenn. Nancy screams in the mirror about dreams not being real. Freddy jumps through and tosses her to the floor. She tries to fight him with a pillow, but that just ends with feathers flying through the air, and the alarm clock goes off. Good thing they had a backup plan in case Glenn fell asleep. Seeing Rod in her dreams gives her the feeling that Rod might be next. Good thing too, because the blanket he's using is coming back to life, or, Freddy's controlling him. The chief doesn't let Nancy see Rod until it's too late, and Freddy hangs Rod with his blanket. After Rod's funeral, they take Nancy to the Katja Institute of Sleep Disorders. I guess it's conveniently located in a town where people die in their sleep. Cool. Anyways, they hook her up to an EEG machine to watch her brain waves as she dreams. Nancy finally drifts away, and her EEG ratings start to go off the charts, and she's acting like Linda Blair from The Exorcist. A doctor rushes in and wakes her up, but Nancy now has a streak of gray hair, slash marks across her arm, and Freddy's fucking hat. Nancy's mom, Marge, played by Bklyn, knows this hat. She starts to catch on what's going on. The hat is pretty memorable. Plus, it even has his fucking name written on it.
It even has his name written in it.
Told ya. Who does that? I guess the same people who write their name on their underwear. Whatever. Anyways, drunk Marge and Nancy get into the argument over Freddy Krueger because her mom knows something that she doesn't. We'll get to that later though. Nancy storms out of the house and her and Glenn walk and talk about the dreams and booby traps. Nancy comes back home to see all of her windows are barred up. Come on now. The only person that's gonna stop is Glenn. Marge is drunk as fuck like always and decides it's time to tell Nancy the story about Freddy Krueger.
He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood. We took gasoline. We poured it all around the place and made a trail of it out the door. Then lit the whole thing up and watched it burn.
Thanks, Mom. I know you wanted this dude dead, and rightly so, but now he wants the souls of the children from the parents who killed him. Nancy calls Crop Top Glenn to inform that she's gonna pull Fred out of her dreams and for Glenn to beat the fuck out of him when she dies. There's only one thing Glenn can do until then.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
Midnight comes and Nancy calls Glenn, but of course, Glenn fell asleep. He can't do shit right. But wait, Nancy's phone rings. Maybe Glenn didn't fuck up.
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
Fuck that. She stirs her phone and tries to leave the house to save Glenn. Her mom drunkenly tells Nancy that it's all for the better and for her to get some sleep. Well, that's all fine and dandy for Nancy, but what about Glenn? This effect was done the same way that Tina's murder was. They had a rotating room that just spun around. That's why the blood seems to drift down the sides. Scene rules, and at the time had the title The Most Fake Blood Used in the Scene. Good job, Nightmare. The cops get to Glenn's house, and Nancy calls her boyfriend's house to talk to her dad. She's going to bring Fred out in the world, and wants her dad to arrest him when he gets out. We cut over Nancy trapping her house like she's expecting the wet bandits to visit. Less micro machines, and more explosive light bulbs and sledgehammers that will hit you at dick level. It's time for Nancy's plan of attack. She says a prayer and goes into the battlefield of the dream world. The war begins.
Countdown mode. 10 minutes and counting.
In the dream world, Nancy makes her way down in the basement, and this time ends up in the boiler room that she never knew she had. Krueger's voice echoes through the boiler room. Nancy's had enough of hide and seek and yells for Krueger to show his face. Eventually, Krueger shows his ugly mug and begins chasing Nancy. She jumps out of the boiling room and lands in her front yard. Krueger calls her a bitch, and Nancy lunges at him within seconds of her alarm clock going off. She wakes up with part of her flower bed, but no Krueger. She's starting to feel like she's going crazy, but then when Krueger pops up, she starts setting up her traps. Nancy yells at the window to let her cops know to get her dad over there. Krueger pops out of the room and gets hit with a sledgehammer and falls over the balcony. Nancy keeps talking shit at Krueger.
Come on, Freddy. Can't be catchy.
I'm gonna split you in two.
As Krueger goes to get Nancy, another truck goes off and an explosion happens right behind Krueger. After playing Ring Around the Rosie with the basement stairs, Nancy throws some flammable liquid on Krueger and lights his ass on fire before getting pushed down the stairs. Her dad comes running out of Glenn's house to see smoke bellowing from her house. 4 cops finally get the door open, but no Krueger? There's some fiery footprints that lead up the stairs though. This can't be good. They find Krueger violating poor Marge as the chief puts him down, only to reveal a weird ass scene where the mom is a skeleton and sinks into another dimension before the portal closes. Not really sure what's going on here. Nancy and her pops don't really seem too affected by seeing this. Krueger comes out of this side dimension and Nancy tells him that he doesn't believe in his stupid ass. She demands her mother and friends back alive. This seems to work because as he goes to kill Nancy, he turns into TV static. Nancy walks out of her mom's room and onto her front porch. And look, it's Marge. She's back. Oh shit, her friends are back too. Seems like telling Freddy he ain't shit works, and it's really is just a bad dream. Or is it? The Freddy dressed car starts doing shit on its own. Then as we hear the jump rope tune, Freddy's arm bashes through the glass in the door and pulls a dummy of Marge through the door. I guess it wasn't just all a dream, eh Nancy? There you have it. This was Nightmare on Elm Street, made in 1984, written and directed by the horror legend Wes Craven. When this movie first came out, I don't think they would have ever imagined how big Freddy Krueger would really become. If there were a Mount Rushmore, Krueger would definitely be on there. While Freddy will get more goofy as the series continues, he truly was something to be afraid of in this classic. This is the series that got me into horror as a kid, and it will always hold a special place in my heart. This movie did so well that the man was hired to create a sequel, which was released a year later. On the next episode, I'll be covering the sequel, so stay tuned when I review A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.